Welcome to the archive. I am one of the sergeants from the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division. I know what you're thinking as you look at these metal shelves and these faded cardboard boxes. You see intelligence reports, maps with worn creases, and sepia-toned photographs that feel distant, almost unreal. But to me, every shadow in those images has a scent, the smell of saltpeter, diesel fuel, and a fear that seeps into your bones in a way no heater ever can. What we keep here aren't just bureaucratic records, they are fragments of souls. Let me tell you what actually happened on that cold morning of June 6, 1944, at Juno Beach. History books love to talk about strategy, amphibious coordination, and tactical success. They make it sound like we were a great clockwork mechanism, cold and precise. But what we lived through, well, official history rarely has room for the tremor in the hands of an 18-year-old boy from Manitoba. The English Channel was furious. If you close your eyes now, you might be able to hear it. The metal of the landing craft slamming against the waves, a hollow, rhythmic sound, as if we were inside a giant bell being struck. Half of my men were hunched over buckets, throwing up their breakfast and their own stomachs. It wasn't just the rough seas. It was the anticipation. We knew the British were on our left at Gold, and the boys from Sword were further up. But Juno was ours. It was our private slice of hell. When the ramp of the landing craft dropped, the world didn't become heroic. It became loud. A noise you don't hear with your ears, but with your chest. The German MG-42 machine guns had a distinctive sound, like someone tearing a giant linen sheet right next to your head. The water wasn't at ankle height like in the movies. For many, it hit their chest. Imagine trying to run with 60 pounds of wet gear on your back while the sand beneath your feet is churned up by mines and mortar fire. The books say we advanced with determination. The truth? We advanced because staying still meant dying, and the only place to go was forward, through sea foam that was rapidly turning red. Beyond the barbed wire, I remember the smell of burning, rubber, gunpowder, and the black smoke from the Sherman tanks that didn't make it out of the surf. I remember looking to my side and seeing men I had known since training in Sussex, men I had shared cigarettes and photos of girlfriends with the night before, transformed into statues of mud and silence. We weren't thinking about the liberation of Europe at that moment. We were thinking about the next meter of sand. We were thinking about how to silence that machine gun nest in the village of Courseulles-sur-Mer that wouldn't stop spitting fire. The books will tell you that by the end of the day, the 3rd Canadian Division had advanced further than any other Allied unit. They will say Juno was a decisive victory, and it was. But here, among these archives, victory has a different face. It has the face of the silence that fell over the beach when the sun finally began to set. So, when you look at these maps and see the red arrows indicating our movements, remember? Every millimeter of that ink represents a man who felt the Normandy chill, who called for his mother in the dark, and who, against all odds, kept walking. This isn't paper. It is what is left of us. And now that you know, these memories belong to you too. What will you do with them? Canada's participation on D-Day, June 6, 1944, was not merely a supporting effort. It was one of the most successful and bloodiest missions of the entire Operation Overlord. While the Americans faced the slaughter at Omaha and the British advanced on Gold and Sword, the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division and the 2nd Armored Brigade were responsible for taking Juno Beach. Here is a deep dive into the experience of these soldiers, from the tension in the English Channel to the brutality of the Normandy dunes. 1. A leap into the dark, the crossing and the wait. For the average Canadian soldier, many of whom were volunteers from farms in Manitoba or factories in Ontario, the experience began long before they touched the sand. The crossing of the English Channel was a test of physical endurance. Crammed into landing craft assault, LCAs, the men fought severe seasickness, damp cold, and the crushing weight of their gear, rough. The prevailing sentiment was a mix of existential dread and impatience. After years of rigorous training in Britain, there was an almost desperate desire to just get it over with. However, the 24-hour delay due to bad weather only heightened the anxiety. When the French coastline finally appeared on the horizon, it did not look like liberation, but a wall of smoke and explosions. 2. The chaos of Juno Beach. Unlike other beaches, the landing at Juno was slightly delayed due to sea conditions and submerged rocks. This had a fatal consequence. The tide rose, covering the mined obstacles installed by the Germans. The landing. When the ramps of the barges dropped, soldiers didn't find dry sand, but water at chest or waist height. Many, weighed down by gear, drowned before even firing a shot. The wall of fire. German defenders from the 716th Infantry Division waited until the Canadians were vulnerable in the surf zone. The noise was described as a constant hammering of MG-42 machine guns and 88mm cannons. The casualty rate. In the early hours, the casualty rate in units such as the Royal Winnipeg Rifles and the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada reached 50%. Soldiers reported that the white sand of Juno quickly turned gray and red. 3. Overcoming the Atlantic Wall. What set the Canadian experience apart was the speed of adaptation under fire. When the initial naval and aerial bombardment failed to destroy many of the German bunkers, it fell to the infantry to settle the matter by the skin of their teeth. Close quarters. Tactics. Canadian soldiers used grenades and flamethrowers to clear strongpoints, pillboxes. The fighting in villages like Bernières-sur-Mer and Courseulles-sur-Mer was house to house. French civilians, emerging from cellars amidst the rubble, saw exhausted soldiers covered in salt and blood who barely had time to accept a word of thanks before rushing to the next machine gun nest. The role of the armor. Unlike Omaha, where many tanks sank, the Canadian tanks, the amphibious Sherman DDs, largely managed to reach the shore. For the infantryman, the sound of a Canadian tank engine was the difference between life and death, providing the necessary support to breach concrete walls and barbed wire fences. 4. The Inland Advance and Legacy. By the end of June 6, the Canadians had achieved an extraordinary feat. They had advanced deeper into French territory than any other Allied force. Although they did not reach their final objective, the Carpiquet airfield and the city of Caen, they cut the main highway linking German defenses and established a solid beachhead. But the cost was bitter. 340 confirmed dead on the first day, 574 wounded, and dozens taken prisoner. For the post-battle psychology, the experience did not end when the beach was cleared. For the survivors, the night of June 6 was spent in shallow slit trenches under constant rain and the threat of counterattacks from panzer divisions. The shock of seeing childhood friends dead in the surf gave way to an emotional hardening that would define the following months of fighting in Normandy. We weren't movie heroes. We were just kids who wanted to go home, but we knew the only way home was through that beach. Account from a veteran of the Regina Rifle Regiment. D-Day for Canada was the trial by fire of a young nation. At Juno Beach, Canadian soldiers ceased to be a colonial support force and became one of the most respected and feared elite troops of World War II. The heroes of Juno Beach proved that even in the darkest moments of history, the courage of a young nation can change the world's destiny. But the big question remains, if you were on that landing craft, what would have gone through your mind the moment that ramp dropped? Thank you so much for joining us and for honoring this story with us. A big hug to each and every one of you, kisses, and see you in the next video. Don't forget, leave your suggestion for a topic for our next video in the comments. We will be more than happy to read your comments and bring to life the stories you want to hear.